Okay. Hello, everyone, and greetings from afternoon in Cairo, Egypt. And I know we have people joining from various places in the world, so we welcome you. It's I always think it's a bit of a shame not to be able to be meeting in person and seeing everyone face to face. But the advantage to being able to do these things online is we can have people join us from wherever they are and whatever time it is. And that certainly goes for our guest speaker today as well, who I will introduce in a moment. But before I do that, I just want to say that I, as the Dean of the School of Continuing Education at the American University in Cairo, I want to explain for those of you who may not know what that school does, what we are. AUC as an institution has been in existence for 101 plus years, which is a long time in terms of American history, but not at all in Egyptian history. It's the blink of an eye. And but for most of that time, the School of Continuing Education, under different names, has been part and parcel of the mission of the American University. And what our role is at AUC is to reach out to the broad swath of Egyptian society, but also increasingly beyond the borders of Egypt, and to offer educational opportunities that are affordable, accessible, are applicable to people's lives. And when I say applicable, I mean that they can be applicable in any way that people decide they're applicable. They can be applicable for someone's career, and we certainly welcome playing that role. They can be applicable for someone's intellectual discovery, but also just their general interest. And so we offer English language, career development, vocational training, customized classes. We have a new program with Azza Fahmy and jewelry design. We do a wide variety of things. We work closely with our friends at the American Embassy in Cairo. We work with the government of Egypt. We work with various entities that support our activities and teacher training around the country and beyond. So I urge you to, if you're interested to learn more, go to our website, follow us on social media. You can find us everywhere. We'd like to find you. We'd like to have you be part of what we do. And part of what we do is we have something called Community Conversations. This is one of them. And the idea behind these is that, one, they really are conversations. It's not an academic lecture, but it's an opportunity to engage with someone who's interesting, who's accomplished in their field, but also shares our desire and our mission of reaching out to a broader audience. And we certainly have someone who fits that bill many times over with us today. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Aseel ElBaba, who is joining us from Canada. So it's morning there, and is probably a little colder there than it is in Cairo today. But she's with us, and we're so pleased that she's here. I'll just give a brief introduction. I don't want to give the full bio because I think a lot of her really interesting story will come out in the conversation. But she's originally from Lebanon, is currently based in Canada. One gem that I saw in her bio that I want to learn more about is that she developed her very first business card when she was 10 years old. I certainly can't say that I did that. And I'd like to learn more about, her thought process and what she was thinking when she did that, and how she thinks that may have sent her on the path that she's on. She has an initial education in economics and business, and worked in banks and financial planning, but then found ways to merge it with additional education in psychotherapy, and to bring together her skills, her experience, her interests in a way that brings us to the topic of today, and that's mindset and money. She's a member of the Financial Therapy Association and the Canadian Association of Psychodynamic Therapy, and has many, many more interesting things in her bio that we'll certainly explore. But number one, welcome, Aseel. We're so happy to have you here with us here in a quote unquote here virtually here at the American University in Cairo. And I hope that you do come visit us at AUC sometime in person. And you can.
Yes, it's on the list. My husband has the pyramids as his desktop display because he's keen on visiting the pyramids soon.
Well, yes, everybody has to come visit the pyramids, and but there's also so much about modern cosmopolitan Cairo that's interesting and engaging as well. So I like to think that the pyramids are a good first stop, and obviously one of the great wonders of the world. But there's much more happening here as well. So maybe as an opening, if it's okay, you could expand on that brief bio that I gave and give us a sense, because I think it's a lot of the story about what you're working on now too, is your own personal story of becoming interested in moving beyond banks and financial planning and combining it with psychotherapy, and how you became interested in what you do now and how you help people now.
Absolutely. I found it interesting that you captured the fact that I created my first business card at the age of 10. So perhaps that's a good starting point because it really shaped some of the decisions and the things that I incorporate today in the work that I do. So I grew up in South Lebanon, and the school across the street from me was turned into a military camp. And given the extreme volatility and the adversity and the environment, the very unstable environment that I grew up in, I had existential questions from very young age, such as, what am I here to do? What is life all about? Who am I? So I recall this one particular day where there was a lot of action happening outside my windows. There's a lot of instability. There was actually some bullets being shot from across the street, and it was very scary time. And I remember going into my brother's room, and I was very scared, and I had an art kit with me, and I said to myself, like, let me think about what would I do if I survived today, because that was like my only way of coping with this war. And I started thinking about, like, what is it that I want to do in this world? And I created my first business card, writing on it, the changer of the world. And then eventually I thought, this is a long title. So I captured the changer, and like that became my nickname essentially, because I believed so much so unapologetically that I'm born to change the world. And with time, going to school and starting to claim this as my mission, it was extremely unpopular. I was a magnet for bullies, and I was looked at as this really weird kid that just stood out in a weird way. And when you're at that age, your desire is to fit in, not to stand out. So it was very uncomfortable. And throughout the times, I started to conform to society and just to norms, and tried my best to fit in boxes that were potentially normal. Went to school, started working in the bank as a financial advisor. There's a long story there because when we came to Canada, we originally had to rely on the social system here to support our starting points here. So going into the banks, I became a financial advisor when my family was still being supported by like the welfare system here. So it was very uncomfortable to hold that title of a financial advisor. It felt like an irony of some sorts, but I wanted to bring back that changer in me. And that's when I decided to actually combine my passion to making an impact in the world with my education, with my skill sets, and develop financial therapy practice. And there's much more to that story, but this is just to give you a snapshot of how that title came about and why my business card was created at the age of 10.
Well, thank you for that and for filling in some of it. But great answers always lead to even more questions. So, one of the things you said that really strikes me is that what makes one stand out as kind of weird and maybe uncomfortable at a certain age can later become a great advantage.
Absolutely.
And the pressure to conform can be so intense,
Yeah.
and that conformity can give us a very narrowly framed sense of what does it mean to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
and what's acceptable, and money and making money, and we'll obviously talk a lot more about that as this conversation unfolds. But I think it becomes disconnected from those other things that you were experiencing in South Lebanon in those tumultuous times, which are these existential questions, which I think probably forced you to think quite early on, not just what do I want to do and be successful, but what do I want to do that really makes a difference? You wanted to be a changer, but who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? And all of those things, those are pretty intense questions to be thinking of when you're a 10-year-old, but the circumstances force them on you.
Yeah.
So there's just, I mean, there's a tremendous amount in that story that I think all of us can, even if we can't relate to those immediate events, we can, I think almost everyone, I certainly can relate to, being that age and a pressure to conform and to take on very narrowly defined questions of success, which then I think also leads to very narrowly defined ideas about what money is, what it means, and how we should think about
Mm-hmm.
money. Although, as you've said in your writings and your great presentations and podcasts that I've listened to, everyone's afraid to really talk about it, to talk about it honestly. Yet
Mm-hmm.
people walk around with these very clear, early formed ideas.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I actually, a lot of the times when I'm discussing money with my clients, naturally the concept of career and transitions and the question of who I am comes up because money is so interconnected with our identity, with the relationship we have with ourselves and the world, with who we think about ourselves. So it's connected to so many layers, and that's why it's a complex topic. And to go back to what you were saying earlier, I always say that I was born knowing who I am, and I'm only trying to remember it. So essentially, I feel like we all have this knowing of who we are and what we're here to do in this world, and through time we tend to forget it. So sometimes when we're trying to goal set and think about the future, it's actually sometimes counterproductive because we have to also take into that consideration that knowing that we had all along, that we lost along the way. So it's an interesting conversation because a lot of the times people come to my office thinking they want to discuss money, and yet money presents itself as a secondary issue to a, sorry, somebody, we started to record, I guess. So money presents itself as a secondary issue to a primary situation that's actually happening. And this is the beauty of this work, because money is only an expression to a much bigger issue that requires to be resolved. And that's the beauty of this work. It's really going to the root of the problem and try to resolve all these things that are happening for us and the clients that I work with, versus just superficially looking at money on the logical level that it presents itself to be, because money is not logical.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our thinking about it and the way we discuss it or don't discuss it is not logical.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came upon your work and was beginning to explore it, I was thinking that probably a lot of the people that you talk to and the people who are facing challenges are facing the kind of the immediate challenge of deciding how to make money, how they could do it in a way that they feel good about it, but that they're at the stage in their lives where they need to make money. But more and more, um, I think, and this gets to your point about, it raises so many deeper issues. It's also why to make money and what to do with that money, and all of these things, that are so unspoken. And I think in this time of COVID, even highlighted in starker relief, because people, it's feeling like such a heavy and super pressured situation. And now we see in some countries at least something called the Great Resignation, where people
Yeah.
are thinking about these things and deciding to leave their jobs. But in some of the reading I've been doing is that though one can understand that impulse they're not often still addressing those kinds of issues that you're talking about. So they've left their job, and that might appear to solve some problem, creates another problem, and that they're now maybe running out of money, but they haven't addressed the deeper problems. I'm wondering how much you're coming across that.
Very much so, because COVID in itself is a traumatic event. And this is why we need a trauma-informed approach to how we support these issues and support clients who are going through these major transitions. And when trauma happens, often there's polarized responses to it. So people go to one extreme or the other. One of the extremes is you become extremely fearful and anxious and hold tightly on to what you have, be it the savings that you have, be it going and hoarding on products and just holding even more tightly to the job that you have. So that's one extreme. And the other is like the extreme opposite, where you start losing faith in the future and feeling that, I have to live for the day. So that's when you quit your job, you spend the money that you have, you just live as if today's your last. And this is a very normal traumatic response to a situation that is really a collective pain we're all going through. And it's not logical by any means. And this is why resolving these situations isn't just about putting a budget or understanding financial literacy, because these are emotional responses, and you cannot navigate an emotional problem with logical tools. This is why financial therapy is that bridge between the logic and the emotion. So you can actually address the emotional issues that are coming up for clients, and only then are they receptive to logical tools and practical strategies that can come in place and have an impact the way they're meant to. So I find this conversation very common these days. People are questioning our systems. And this is why, as well, financial therapy is not only a tool for personal development, but I also believe it to be a tool for systemic change, because we are now really looking at the system, the way our economical system is built on. It's not in alignment with our well-being as the labor force. Our mental health is struggling, and it has been struggling for years. Now it's just these issues are being accelerated and magnified so that we're able to actually we're no longer able to neglect them. But it's not new. This has been going on for years. It's the product of colonialism, capitalism, all these systems that really don't work in alignment with people, planet, and profit. So essentially, this is a much bigger conversation, and we can zoom into an individual's life and explore their unique circumstances, but we can also zoom out and look at the collective and the macro systemic issues that we need to address.
And maybe you could give us a sense about how you, with your your training and education and experience in business and economics, but also in psychotherapy. So when you have a client, or or you're talking to a group or something, what are the kind of the basics of your approach? How does it work?
Yes, it's a great question. Because this field is relatively new, it was developed, to give you context on the field of financial therapy first. It was actually developed right around the 2008 market crash in the US. And that's because the need for this interdisciplinary approach emerged. People were having crisis and losing a lot of their financial wealth, be it in the real estate or the stock market. So they had this extreme psychological and emotional crisis, but they also needed some more tangible, practical ways to move forward. If they go to the financial planner, they had that emotional gap that was not addressed, because the financial planner is not trained to talk about the psychology or the emotion that the client is going through. And they go to their therapist and they're lacking that financial understanding of things. So that's why the field of financial therapy emerged, and it's been happening since just over a decade. Having said that, every financial therapist right now approaches this very differently, because you have a home study that you come from. So you're either a financial planner first or a mental health practitioner, and then you add certain layers of certifications and trainings on top of your home study. And I think in the future, financial therapy will evolve to have its own path. But for now, this is how financial therapists are coming into this practice. So personally, I'm one of the few ones that are actually equally trained in both, where I was a financial planner, I have my designations there, but I also am a psychotherapist in training. So rarely do you find people who are fully trained in both. So when I approach a client, it really depends on what is this client coming to me with? What are they trying to resolve? Is it more on the practical nature of some of the strategies that they're looking to look and examine, or is it more on the emotional side? And as I continue to evolve my practice, I'm actually starting to refer the people who are coming in for investment advice and strategies to my colleagues who are still doing financial plans, and I'm more focused on the emotional sides of this conversation, simply because this is where the gap is, and I really wanted to bridge that gap. So what I do with my clients, I have two ways in which I work with people, either one-on-one or in a group therapy, which I recently started another group therapy focused on Arab women specifically. So in March 2020, I started my practice as a financial therapist. And during that time, I was doing group therapy for anybody who was willing to belong to a space to first examine this issue of money. Because how can you resolve an issue that you're not even aware of where the problems are? You know something is not working, you know something is wrong, you know something is off, but you really have no idea where to even start. And this is why awareness is one of the foundational aspects of this work, is starting to bring awareness, bringing light into what are the issues that you're even facing with this topic. What are your thoughts, emotions, and belief systems around money? And because money is a very big taboo, a lot of people have no idea where they stand on these issues. So what I like to do the first few sessions with clients is really starting to bring awareness on having people identify what these things are, because only then can we identify which parts of these thoughts and emotions and beliefs are dysfunctional, which parts are still unresolved from previous traumas. And this is where I start developing strategies to move beyond that. So I'll give you an example on my most recent work, because it's really relevant to the American universities in Cairo, because I'm focused specifically on exploring financial therapy for Arab women, because not only am I interested in each of these women's unique life and experience, but I'm also adding the layer of the cultural and the gender role that plays that impacts how these women are behaving and creating the financial experiences they are. And there are certain collective themes that are starting to emerge that gives so much depth to this work, and it's a really beautiful experience. And I can go into some more details if you'd like, to give you examples of what are some of the themes that are surfacing. But this is how this process works, basically.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And one of the many things I was thinking about as you were discussing it was it sounds like a course or a workshop that should be hosted by the School of Continuing Education. So
I would love that.
stay tuned, everyone. You're here for the beginning of something larger.
Absolutely.
And I'm not kidding. I mean, I really think that's very fascinating. And it sounded like, correct me if I'm wrong, that at the beginning of your practice, you were having individuals coming to you, and then you were doing some groups as well. But given some of the things you were just saying, and given what I have certainly read and understood that is at the heart of a lot of relationship issues,
Mm-hmm.
money. I wonder if you have plans to consider, like, couples who are working out or not working out their kind of collective mindset
Mm-hmm.
relationship about money.
Absolutely. So the field itself is new, and I'm also relatively playing in the sandbox still, trying to figure out my niche, because the demand is huge. Every single one of us across the globe needs financial therapy, and the reason being because like I said earlier, it's connected to so many layers of our life, our identity, our careers, our transitions. So it's key. I have yet to work with couples specifically, but often I get clients who come to me because they're experiencing issues with their partner. They just come as a single person to work with me on some of the issues from their perspective. However, I do raise awareness on certain frameworks that couples can focus on. For example, there's something called the conflict resolution framework for money arguments for couples, and you can actually use that framework for not just a romantic partnership, but even if you have a business partner or a father-son relationship, or even friends. Because technically this issue is uncomfortable regardless who you're talking about it with, but it's just very common in a partnership for sure. Whether or not I want to specialize in couples is yet to be determined. I'm very open to exploring different things. There's so many demands, like I said, but the key issue is that both need to be committed to come forward. And the reason it's sometimes challenging because the word therapy still has stigma associated with it. Even in North America, I'm sure in the Middle East it's even more the case, but even in North America, the word therapy is still not comfortable for people to seek. So sometimes I present the work that I do in the form of coaching. Like, people are more receptive to a money mindset coach than they are to the word financial therapist. And that's some of the challenges in this area.
Yeah, well, and that, I mean, I think that's certainly true. I'm from North America, but I'm here in the Middle East now, and I think that there's stigma in both places. Maybe it manifests in different ways, but it certainly exists. Well, and speaking of the Middle East, so to go back to your work with Arab women, and you said there are certain themes emerging.
Yeah.
Maybe you could, for this audience, give us a sense of what some of them are and where you think it might be going.
Oh, it's such beautiful work. Absolutely, I can. So one of the themes that came up, for example, is because our culture has a lot of religious and spiritual influences, there's something called the locus of control. And the locus of control is whether somebody believes that they have control over their life, or if their life is predestined or predetermined ahead of time. And the locus of control is one of those things that actually impacts how we save and how we invest and how we behave with money. The more internal locus control you have, the more control you have over your money, because you feel that your actions have a direct correlation and a direct impact on the outcomes and the experiences you create for yourself, versus somebody who has an external locus of control, who believes their life is already predetermined, or that they're just reacting to things as they happen, but something bigger determines their life. So one of the things we started to explore is that locus of control for people who are very religious or spiritual tends to be more external, and therefore when something happens to their financial situation, it's like, oh, it's out of my hand, or that's what God wants, or certain phrases that are very much steeped into our culture are used to ease the pain of financial struggles in some cases. But that takes away from our own ability to actually create changes that we want. And sometimes when you coach clients on the locus of control piece, it's really trying to empower them while still respecting their religious views or spiritual views, but empowering them with the tools they need to create these changes, and make and have a more internal focus of control. So that's one theme. And there's another one about, I call it the glorification of the martyr syndrome. I know it's a very, it's a complicated word or complicated phrase, but the reason I really believe this is steeped into our identity, because we glorify struggles like victimhood, and sacrifice, like especially the role of the women in the Middle East. Like, we sacrifice our life for our kids, we sacrifice our life to fit into society's molds, and sometimes we lose on being our authentic selves, because we sometimes just have to adapt to what society and family expectations and all these different boxes. And there's actually camaraderie in that when you commiserate with people, and that's that creates a sense of belonging and a huge part of our identity. When I'm sitting with my friends and I'm talking about my financial struggles and they're relating to it, and then they're adding stories of what they're going through, there's a bond that's created there. And that bond is a big part of our belonging and our identity. And that's why it's so hard to break through these frames and start, if you want to create financial freedom for yourself and break outside these molds, it sometimes creates this cognitive dissonance, because your identity and your sense of belonging is shattered. And it's a big part of our culture to have very strong social values and family values. So that theme is huge, because we glorify that, like, it's almost like we celebrate the fact that life is meant to be a struggle, and look at all these things I have to go through, and look at all these struggles I have to overcome. And it has a really big impact in the type of experiences we create for ourselves, because we actually, our thoughts impact very much the outcomes that we experience. And this is also a part of coaching, is trying to bring this awareness to clients that your thoughts turn into things. Your thoughts really have a big impact on the experiences you have. And the other thing that also came up, I would say, as if the gender piece specifically was almost as if money is not ours. Like, we're making money, and we're empowered and educated to make money, but as if we're not entitled to keep the money that we have, and we have to give it away as soon as we get it, either to spend it on our family and our community. But that role of charity as well is very, very big. And that role of like, it's almost as if money is just is tainted with evilness or dirt, and we just want to get rid of it as soon as we get it. So there's that concept as well of the limited beliefs we have around wealth and money to begin with. There's so much more, but these are some key elements that came up: the locus of control, the belief system that money is tainted or evil, and we just want to get rid of it, and the martyr syndrome, the glorification of that.
Oh, that's really fascinating. Thank you. And as you were speaking, I was also thinking that I could certainly see how those themes would be emerging in working with these particular groups. But at the same time, I can also see the commonalities outside of the Middle East, that there are certainly elements of each of those themes that exist in other places. So
Absolutely.
that makes me think also about the fact that you left one place and then had to find your way in a new place, in a new culture. And I think, in my experience, and doing it in reverse, that it gives one pause and opportunity to have a better sense of one's home country and culture. You can see more from a distance and understand more about yourself in that place than you can when you're there. And but you can also start to see a lot of commonalities that often I think are not really acknowledged. If you're just reading what's ever in the newspaper of the day and reporting on events from somewhere else in the world, they tend to report, it's what the way the news works. They report bad things and not these sort of deeper analyses. So maybe you could give us just kind of a sense, because I think it fits into your story so importantly, of moving from the Middle East to North America, and what kinds of things maybe took you by surprise, and what sorts of things you saw from a distance about Lebanon or the Middle East that you hadn't before, and how that fits into your work.
That's such a great question, actually. I feel like Lebanon is also different than other areas in the Arab world. We have so many nuances. Every area is very unique, but Lebanon in itself is also very diverse in political and belief systems. So, if I reflect on my childhood, for example, I had a pretty unique childhood. I think my dad is on the call. My dad was actually a communist. He was an atheist. So I grew up in a very in that environment, but he also belonged to a family that was very religious, and we lived in a building with my uncles. So I had like my uncle, and my dad, three-floor building, and my uncles would be praying 5 times a day, and they would read the Quran. They were very, very religious, and my dad was an atheist. So it was very interesting growing up in that environment. But interestingly, if I recall viewing how they dealt with money, they actually dealt with money almost the same way, but for different reasons. Because my dad viewed money as also a source of corruption, or he hated capitalism, and he values honesty, he values social equity. So he subconsciously didn't want the pursuit of money and wealth for different reasons. But my uncle had the very same behaviors, but from a religious context. He actually felt that money is meant to be charitable, that you're just a vessel of God, and when you get money, you just distribute it on people who are less fortunate. So he also had dysfunctional behaviors with money, but from a completely different lens, almost the polar opposite. So it was an interesting environment to grow up in, being influenced by these thoughts and behaviors. So I had very limiting beliefs myself around money and wealth, being influenced by both the communist and the religious perspective. So coming to North America, here I feel the role money plays is very much focused on your career, on your accomplishment, on your sense. There's a more individualistic approach to it. Over there, it's more community based. It's more about your role in community, your role in the family, your role in your neighborhood or your society. Here, it's about your career, your personal accomplishment, your self-actualization in a way. And to a certain extent, there's a lot of emphasis that your net worth is equal to your self-worth in North America. And that actually is a very dysfunctional way of looking at things for different reasons. So there's a huge, that creates a lot of pressure on people here, especially when a profit is looked at as almost the enemy of passion or purpose. And there's something here that's not aligned when especially if people have a very passionate approach to their career, be it artists, be it social workers, be it even therapists, or people who are keen on giving back, the nonprofit world. They have a very hard time mastering their financial wealth, or even accumulating wealth along the way, because of that almost battle between passion and profit, which I also talk about. But very different themes that I saw, and yet there's also a universal collective around these dysfunctional behaviors, like you said. So even though I'm focusing in my group coaching recently on Arab women, some of these themes easily can be seen in like Latin cultures, in like the Black American culture, in many other cultures. So it's interesting to see what's unique for a specific culture, but what is also universal that many people can relate to.
Thank you for that. I don't want to take too much more time. I'm just going to ask one last question, and then people can be thinking about questions of their own for you. But I want to, the last thing I want to say, and you touched upon a bit of this in talking about the North America versus the Middle East. And that is, like, I personally have spent my life working in institutions, and in some cases, large institutions, government in New York, and federal government, and universities, and an NGO, and but more and more, and not just because of COVID, even predating COVID, we can see here in Egypt and back in the US as well, that there are people more and more who are kind of striking out on their own, who are not kind of deciding that the way they're going to make money and the way that they're going to think about compensation is based upon their role in a large institution. And I think, working in an institution can give great support, a sense of comfort, but at the same time can feel constraining to many people. But going out on your own, and this gets back to, the idea that net worth and self-worth relationship, there's no net. You're just on your own, and you're trying to make it work. And I wonder how much with your clients now, or talking to colleagues, you're seeing people, particularly younger people, really trying to work through these issues of institutions versus entrepreneurship, et
Yeah,
cetera.
absolutely. This is huge. And that's because like the millennial generation and the Gen Zs are having issues with what these institutions stand for. And like I said earlier, the capitalistic systems and the colonialism have been, you know, in misalignment with environment, with people's well-being, with the labor force, mental health, and all these issues. And the younger generation is starting to be very much aware of that. So these are issues that no longer can be ignored. And that's why there's sometimes a lot of cognitive dissonance that's taking place when an individual wants to start working in a corporation, feeling misaligned with what that corporation stands for, or some of the practices that are being just misaligned with their individual values. But there's one key thing that I forgot to mention earlier about this contrast of the Middle East and the North America as well, which is really important, and it ties into this question, which is why it's relevant to mention now. It's the concept of time horizon, and this is huge, huge, huge to understand, because time horizon is our ability to think about the future. And when we grow up in very traumatic, adverse, or unstable environments, whether we experienced war or instability in whichever way, shape, or form it presents, which unfortunately the Middle East is filled with that type of turbulence, it really limits our ability to be future thinkers or future forward thinkers. And the more, the less, well, there's data to show that even though your income, the more income you make, the more tendency you have to save and invest. However, the ability for you to think about the future has a much bigger impact than your increase of income on how you save and invest to the future. And I recall my dad once vividly told me, when I started working in North America, that I set up a retirement account for myself at 25, which was very like it was almost something that made no logic for him. You're 25 and you're saving for your retirement. When in North America, it's actually part of the practice here is to start saving to retirement the day you start working. But because of that inability to think very much about the future, because the future was very unstable and you live for the day in the Middle East, that also creates a very big contrast in how we plan our careers, how we plan for our retirement, how we plan for any future goal we want to have. And that's the advantage of living in a more stable environment, is you tend to have your basic needs met and you have your nervous system regulated, so you're actually able to think more about the future. And there's more coaching ways in which I can implement with clients to support this this focus on the future and clarity that actually impacts the way they behave with money. So when it comes to career and thinking about your career, that future thinking is part of what it impacts people and how it impacts people's decisions as well, whether they want to go on their own or they want to belong to an institution that, rarely are we going to ever see now people who commit 20-30 years to one institution. Like these days I feel are gone, especially for my generation. And now there's always these side hustles and businesses, and that's because people who are excited about what they want to create and aligning their values with their careers, they're shifting these thought processes from the older generation who valued more stability, and now this generation is valuing more big, like we're valuing more pursuing our passion and combining that with the life and the careers we want for ourselves.
Thank you. So if anyone has a question, please in the participant area, raise your hand and we'll call on you and unmute you and allow you to ask the question. I would just say something I once heard said at a conference many years ago. Make sure that your question is actually a question and that it's brief and respectful and all of those nice things. And while you're thinking of a question and raising your hands, let me just say one last thing though, Aseel, in response to what you just said. I think, in all things moderation, and certainly, you were mentioning this difference of time horizon. I think there's the other dysfunction, if I could use that word, and that are people who can only think about the future. and who are, diligently saving, and at some point they think they're going to retire, and maybe they are in those institutions where they're going to be there for a long time and for the proverbial gold watch, but um, they don't enjoy their money. They
Mhm.
don't enjoy their time when they have money. And you
Right.
hear too many stories about people who, work too long and then they retire, and before they can enjoy any of it, they're gone.
Mhm.
And so, I think there has to be some happy medium. It seems to me.
Absolutely. This is why this conversation is very personal. Sometimes when we talk about cultures and macro, we tend to generalize because we're talking about what is the most common thing to see in that culture based on the collective. But there's certainly, like there's a spectrum that people fall under, and you see polarized behaviors regardless which culture you're examining. But when you want to present something, you just look at the general, like, normative behavior in that specific demographic. However, this ability to hoard and actually be fearful of spending money, I've seen that a lot with my clients as well. I had a client who was a millionaire and was not able to spend money comfortably on himself or his family, and it was very much fear-based, knowing the trauma of the scarcity he grew up in. And we needed to address that emotional wound, not just, he's very much aware that he can spend comfortably, but that was an emotional wound that he grew up in a very scarcity mentality, that we needed to address that fear of spending and fear of losing the wealth that he very much worked hard to accumulate. So absolutely, you see different sides of the equation.
Thank you. And with that, we have our first question from Hana, Sudan.
Yes, hi, Jim.
Hi.
Thank you, Aseel, very much for your talk and the great discussion. My question is, what would be, in your experience, the best ratio or percentage to save from your salary every month or every year?
Thank you for that question, Hannah. Great question. The beauty about this work is that there's no one size fit all. We all have very unique circumstances, whether it's depending on the income you have, the kind of dependence, like if you have kids or if you have other dependents, the type of goals that you're saving for. So it's a combination of looking at your present situation and factoring in the future goals that you're saving towards, and therefore that percentage is actually unique from one person to the other. However, from a general perspective, there's lots of financial experts that say you have to pay yourself first, and when you put money towards your savings, it's a form of paying yourself. They recommend something around 10% to be like a minimum starting point. But that's why I don't rely on these general numbers, because some people can save 50% of their income and some people can only save 5%. It's just about being mindful of how much you're saving and what you're saving for. And once you have clarity on the goals that you're saving for, then you're going to be more disciplined in approaching that. So when my clients, for example, I had a client who had a hard time saving, and when we looked at why, it wasn't because she didn't have that buffer or that surplus at the end of the month. It was more because she didn't know what she was saving for. She had lack of clarity about the future and about her goals. But once we got that clarity, then naturally she found the discipline, and also she was able to determine the surplus that goes towards these goals. So it's really a combination about managing what's in front of you right now and also having clarity and focus about the future. And that's why it's a personalized answer for each person, and 10% is just a very general guideline that people in the space recommend. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for that answer. So we now have a question from Isra.
First of all, thank you, Aseel, for this simple and deep analysis of the relation between logic and emotion, or the conflict between logic and emotion.
Yes.
concerning saving money.
Yeah.
So, for example, I just want to ask a question. A friend of mine, for example, she suffers from an emotional problem in her life. So she decided to not to save money and to live it up and save all her money and not to save anything for the future.
Mm-hmm.
So that approach is considered a good thing, or um, how to converse her to change her way of thinking and to save money for any problem that can we face in the future.
Sure. So she's spending all her money, because you cut off for a second. I just want to clarify that that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason it's important to understand that 4 out of 5 financial decisions that we make are actually ran by our emotions and not our logic. And the reason this is an important thing to understand to begin with, because sometimes we are very critical on ourselves when we do something that we know is not logical. So we say to ourselves, I should have known better. I know better. I have my degrees in, some people have degrees in finance and accounting and yet have big debt and big financial managers. And we tend to be very hard on ourselves when we're very critical about the fact that we should have known better. So once we understand that link between emotion and our decision, we automatically introduce compassion to the equation. And we now are capable of at least approaching this from a much more compassionate, trauma-informed lens. So in this specific case, convincing her is not going to work, because convincing her is a logical thing. And what she seems to be going through is an emotional problem that in itself needs to be addressed so we can go beyond that barrier and logic eventually sinks in. Most likely, she on some level knows that she needs to save for the future. There's nobody in this world who doesn't know that. Knowing it and doing it is different, and how we get ourselves to move from not knowing to doing is through resolving these emotional obstacles that tend to be in the way. So how I would work with that client is getting to the root of what is it about the future that's scaring her. What is that emotional issue that she's dealing with? And sometimes that requires us to explore unfinished business from the past. Unfinished or unresolved business is a term we use in the mental health field for certain traumas that are still lingering in our experience that tend to impact our present situation. So in her case, it's not logic that she needs, it's that space to explore what are some of the things that she's struggling to deal with on an emotional level.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you. We have one last question before we conclude from Alia. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Aseel, for this amazing presentation. I just wanted to make a quick comment and a question. So in Egypt, we really lack having financial therapists. So it's still, as you said, it's a very early field, it's a young field. And so we don't really have professionals in this field yet who know the context here. And so my question is about if one is interested in such a field, where can they start? I'm obviously asking for myself, but would one take the angle of financial planning, since in Egypt we don't really have financial planning as a field of specialization? We have finance, we have accounting, and we have wealth management that is geared towards people with more wealth.
Yeah.
Or would one take the psychotherapy like twist, and how can you combine them later on? Sorry if it's a long question.
Oh, it's perfect. So in the Financial Therapy Association, there's about 300 financial therapists right now. They're mainly based in the US. There's only a handful in Canada. And I think there's only a handful internationally. And the goal is to make it more an international approach. And every single one of these 300 people have a different way of how they landed in financial therapy, simply because it is a relatively new field. And like I said, the home based can be either mental health or financial based. What I would say for you or anybody who's interested in heading this to this field is starting where you feel your passion lies. Some people are more in the analytical, number, are logical. They just want the strategy approach to money, and they start building that foundation, and then they add layers of being trained in certain therapeutic or certain interventions that they can introduce to clients. Others are more interested in that mental health space, and they can start there and then add layers of understanding the practical sides of money. So there's no right one size fit all. You can approach it from either angle. The idea is simply, I feel that our role as a financial therapist, regardless how we land in that space, is to challenge how people feel, think, behave, and communicate with money. That's the role.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, before we conclude, I just want to say to everyone that Aseel is incredibly and impressively prolific, and there are podcasts to be listened to, there are YouTubes to be seen, there are writings to be read, and you all have Google at your fingertips. But Aseel, is there any place that you would like to direct people to start off to explore your ideas further?
The podcast is a great start for sure. It's called Conscious Economics. Perhaps I can put it in the chat if you want. Conscious Economics, you can find it on Spotify, YouTube. I have a co-host with me, Rayan and Rosalind, and we explore different topics around financial therapy. The other, my website is not really updated. I mean, you can obviously view my website as well, holisticoptimalwealth.com. And on my website, you have the ability to book a 30-minute complimentary consultation with me should you like to discuss anything further, which is a really good place to start too, because you can ask me anything. You can have if you want to enter into the field as a financial therapist, or you want to be the recipient. And my goal is to create more group coaching experiences for individuals, because I feel there's something very healing about the group approach, because not only are you looking into your own work, but you're also collectively sharing, and there's storytelling. And when we share, we heal. And I'm going to be creating more experiences around that, particularly focused on Arabs as well. So it'll be a good starting point. So my website, my podcast, and you can book a consultation with me, complimentary.
Well, having explored many of them myself over the last couple of weeks, I highly recommend it to everyone watching this community conversation. Well, thank you again, Aseel, for being part of this conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you so
I sincerely
much.
hope that this is the beginning of a longer relationship between you and the School of Continuing Education at AUC, and we find other ways to work together. I also invite all of you to come back to our ensuing conversations. We are going to be having a talk. I hope that it will be a hybrid one in Oriental Hall in the AUC Tahrir campus, and for those of you in Cairo, and that we'll also be doing it online with the fantastic musician Yusra El-Hawari, who will be discussing not only her music, but how everyone can take creativity and integrate it into their lives, and how we can find creative inspiration in our everyday lives in ways that we hadn't thought of before. But she's an absolute genius at doing that. And she's going to talk to us about that and also play some of her music. So that's on March 24th at 4 p.m. Cairo time. And you can find more about that in our many social media platforms. Aseel, thank you again so much for being part of this. This was really a fascinating conversation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I'm also going to put my Instagram handle for anybody. Oh, no, sorry. It's this one. Sorry. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's an honor to share my life's purpose with you. So I'm very happy and honored to be in your presence and everybody.
Okay. Thanks to all involved, and be well, and to be continued on many levels. Bye-bye.